Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This podcast is all about creativity. In this episode, you'll hear Ariane Daguin, CEO and co-founder of D'Artagnan. She's well known for introducing the first organic chicken in the US. It was years before the USDA acknowledged the standard with regulation of the organic label that we know today. She talks about how she created a network of local farmers in order to meet D'Artagnan's organic specifications and high-quality bar. But before, she told me what she tried to do all her life.
All my life, I always tried to contribute to make people eat better. And it is very enriching because in the United States, there is so much, so much potential. There are people who eat to survive. They see food as fuel instead of pleasure.
And what's your vision about food?
For me, it's all about pleasure. Of course, there is a little element of fuel in there, but it's all about pleasure. And it happens to be that pleasure and good nutrition go hand in hand. To me, okay? I'm convinced that eating everything the way it comes in nature, but in moderation, is a good balance. There is a reason why nature was made this way, and it happens to be good. So when we push people to eat too much meat, it's not good. When we push people to eat only vegetables, it's not good. When we push people to create new breeds of animals that are less fatty or cheaper and grown faster, and it's not good. Something changed in the nutrition as well as, of course, the taste.
What brought you from France to America?
So I came to America as a student. I'm from a family of 3 children, 7th generation in the food business. I was the eldest. I'm still the eldest. My brother is 1 year younger. It was clear, never said, but clear in the family that my brother was going to take over the hotel restaurant, the family business. That's at that time, that's how it was done. The women would go and marry somebody and follow that person, and the guys would stay and keep the business. So very young, I had this impression that I needed to prove to myself, but most importantly to my family, to my father, that I was worth something, that me too, I could have taken over the restaurant. And in order to do that, to prove that, I had to go very far, because my father was 2 Michelin stars, a big voice in the restaurant and hotel industry in France, famous for his foie gras making during the Nouvelle Cuisine. He was right there with the other guys. And so I felt that it would be nice to try to prove myself in a country, in a space where he wasn't that known. And that's how I came to America, where everything had to be done in the food. There was this song that illustrated this very well. That was my all-time favorite song by a pop singer in France. The name of that French singer was a very American name, Joe Dassin, and his song, literally translated, is "America, I want to have it and I will have it."
Do you remember your very first impression when you immigrated from France to New York?
There were several. There were a couple of different impressions. The first one was a total fright because I had a one-way ticket. Also, because of the situation, when I left, I didn't left in good terms with my parents. So it was very difficult. The first impression arriving here was, wow, this is big. This is a big country. Those are big cars. It's almost 40 years ago. The cars were huge. The roads were huge. That airport was huge. People were big. The portions in the plate were huge. Everything was so big. And that's what I remember.
How did it all start with your food business here in New York, D'Artagnan? What was the concept at the origin?
There was no concept. It was just following opportunities. I had to drop out from Barnard College, going into Columbia University. I ran out of money. Meanwhile, that summer, I had a job at a little charcuterie called Les Trois Petits Cochons, the Three Little Pigs. There, at the end of the summer, the bosses told me you should stay full time. And it was very good because I ran out of money anyway, so I couldn't go back to Columbia University. And so I stayed there for 5 years. And one day, at the end of those 5 years, when I was, I must say, becoming a little bit restless, I needed to start my own company, I guess. I mean, I was young, I had nothing to lose. And then those two Israeli guys arrived with the foie gras in their hands, explaining that they were starting the first foie gras farm in America. So raising ducks for foie gras, which did not exist in America at the time. They had the know-how, the techniques. Israel was a big producer of foie gras at the time. And to me, it was, hey, I fell in that pot when I was a baby, I know what foie gras is all about. I mean, I was raised on foie gras. And so it was a very enthusiastic project that I took on for my bosses, except to make it short, they didn't want to go into this. So when it was clear that they were not going to sign the contract that I had drafted and go into foie gras, I had to leave and open my own company with my then partner. And we started D'Artagnan. So at the very beginning, the concept was selling the foie gras that those guys were coming to get from the ducks. Then it was very clear that you don't buy just the foie gras, you need to buy the breast and the leg and the bones and the gizzards and the heart and all the meat that come with it, and make rillettes and make confit and make smoked duck breast, duck prosciutto, pâté, to be able to sell the rest of the meat. Foie gras was going to be easy with restaurants, but the rest of it was going to be maybe a little more difficult, which is not so true today. Today, magret sales tend to outsell foie gras. So it's our job at D'Artagnan to keep the balance. But right there at the start, we understood that even just one duck, even with a foie gras in there, was not going to be sufficient to make a living. And so naturally, we went immediately into looking for farmers who would be able to sell us good meat proteins coming from animals that would have been well raised, because I couldn't see that on the market.
So you mean that kind of quality didn't exist on the market at the time?
No, it didn't exist. I never had a good chicken in America up until then. It was all factory farm, really mushy, tasteless, or even worse, tasting like fish chickens. And things that didn't exist. Rabbit, quail, pheasant, or things that were pretty rare and were on the market but at a very confidential level, venison, buffalo, meats like that. And so right away we figure, why not look for farmers who would be willing to raise animals without antibiotics, without any medication, the right way, with lots of space, if possible heritage breeds, breeds that will grow more slowly than the commodity hybrids, but because of that we'll have more taste. And the captive audience for that was all those new chefs who were coming out from the CIA, Culinary Institute of America, the French Culinary Institute. At the time it was there was a school called the Peter Kump School that became ICE later, Johnson and Wales. I mean, all those schools were starting to have professional chefs coming out very young, very ambitious to be the star of the restaurant, with ingredients in the plate that made sense and picking and choosing the best ingredients possible. We were so lucky to have arrived in that market at that time. And that's how we were totally invaded by the demand that was in the restaurant business.
How did you do to create a network of farmers who meet your high quality standards?
Well, at the beginning it was very difficult. We were young, we had no assets, we were not known, they thought we were crazy. All I wanted was for them to raise the animals a little bit the way Label Rouge specifications are in France, meaning the right way, without any medication, with a lot of space, no stress, and if possible, heritage breeds. For example, we did identify a farm that was raising quail in North Carolina, and so I went to see them, and we discovered the Amish community in Pennsylvania. There it was much easier to convince them to raise poultry.
Why was it much easier with them, with this community?
Because in the Amish community, there are a lot of idiosyncrasies that are a little strange, but there is one philosophy that is very, very close to what we were looking for. And that philosophy is that you are on earth to take a legacy from the last generation, a property, some cattle, a piece of land, something, and your responsibility is to bring it to the next generation in as good a shape, but if possible better than what was given to you. And so because of that, they don't damage, they don't pollute, and they are very respectful of the live beings, the animals and everything around. And so naturally, they were on the same page than us. No medication, lots of space, no stress, etc. And that's how we were able to grow the poultry part, the feathered animals. The hairy animals, it took more work and traveling a little more around the US. And little by little, we grow like that. First, mostly with poultry and those ducks, of course, with the foie gras. And little by little, going after venison, elk, buffalo, and now beef. It's been almost 10 years now. Good beef, Wagyu, Angus, but again, very well raised the right way. And so today, the conundrum is very different. Farmers knock at the door every day. And for us, the problem is not finding farmers. The problem is finding slaughterhouses, processors who are willing to process those animals who don't look like the thousands of animals that come through that processing every day. And that's the challenge today.
Do you mean that the American standards are not enough for you?
I wouldn't say it in those terms. There are different degrees in America. Unfortunately, those different degrees are not catered by the processors. The processors, in order to get the cost at the minimum possible, have a huge interest in making huge investment in huge slaughterhouses. When I say huge, that means minimum 1,000 people working in there. And so they cater to factory farmed animals, which means animals that are cookie cutter, exactly the same size coming up. You have everybody in that processing place specialized to one cut or one gesture at a time. And that makes sense for economical reasons, economy of scale, labor per pound of meat coming out. Because of what we do and the way we do it, the animals coming out of our farmers are very different than that. They are bigger, they are stockier, they are fatter, they are older, they are more difficult to work with.
Why is it more difficult to work with these animals?
Because they are not of the same size, and they are not of the same size than the other ones that are coming in a huge majority in those slaughterhouses. So for us, they have to stop everything, change the shackle, the size of the shackles or the size of the different things that are going on in there, and then start again. Every time you stop 1,000 people to work for even if it's 15, 20 minutes, it's a huge cost. For us, it is the biggest challenge today. It is difficult to find slaughterhouses that are of a more humane size, of a smaller size. It is, of course, much more expensive than processing the animals at those other places. So it does have a resistance on the market. There is a certain level that you cannot go above. Even if your product is 10 times better, you cannot price it 10 times better. You have to price it at maybe 2-3 times, but not 10 times.
So your products are 2-3 times more expensive than the usual products on the market?
It depends which species, but certainly there is a price to what we do. Let's talk about chicken, for example. A good chicken, for us, A good chicken that is not heritage is 50 days old. A heritage is minimum 100 days old. When I talk about a 100 days old chicken, for America, it's huge and very old. For France, it's nothing. Le petit poulet noir du Gers or the poulet de Bresse are much older than that.
How old are they?
Up to 6 months old. When you look at a chicken in terms of dollars, in terms of cost, you look at what that chicken ate. A chicken that is 50 days old is certainly going to be much more expensive than the chicken that has been processed at 38 days old, which is a norm for all the factory farm chickens around. So just by that, with the same chicken and same kind of feed, mine are going to be more expensive just because of that. And then on top of that, if it is a heritage at 100 days old, then it's that much more. People who understand the quality are first and foremost the chefs of the restaurants. They will naturally geared towards a heritage chicken, the best possible chicken. In retail stores or on our e-commerce, on our website, the chickens that are more popular are in between. You know, they are a little more expensive than what you have already existing, but not hugely more. What is very encouraging is that you see as American consumers are becoming more and more foodies and more interested in gastronomy, they understand the value more and more. And so that's what we've been surfing on at D'Artagnan for the last now 34 years. It's the fact that consumers are more and more educated. They want to know what they put in their body, and so indirectly they want to know what that animal ate because that's what they are putting in their body. I can frankly say, sincerely say, that the taste buds of the Americans is changing for the better and has been changing for the better in the last 40 years. It's pretty amazing.
And there's the issue about sustainability, the costs for the whole society.
Yes, and that is coming through different ways. When you raise animals the right way, they don't damage the earth. They do give decent earnings to the farmers. They do not have any impact, of course, on the pollution, but also on the health of the people who are eating them, or not as much impact as medication-loaded factory farm. So yes, it's good, it's sustainable, it comes from small farmers.
How do you control these high quality standards in the farms you are working with?
So there are several ways to control. We go and visit farmers very often. In some of the programs, like our Green Circle Chicken, we have a third-party certificator who goes and visits absolutely all the farmers on a regular basis. So we try to develop that as much as possible. But it's a whole system that is not just on the honor system. There are also ways technologically that are easier and easier to find out. You know, you just take a little piece of tissue from a piece of meat, you send it to the lab, and it's very easy now to see if something happened to that animal, if that animal was sick and had to be medicated or not.
Did it happen that you have to change your partnership with certain farms?
We have, I think the large majority of farmers are very happy about the relationship. We go through a very transparent process. In general, because it means more money and it also means a better way of farming. People love not to have to use medication. It's expensive, it's bad, they don't have to have thousands and thousands of chickens in a small coop to make a living. So it is a win-win situation there. The only case I can remember where we had to basically fire a farmer is simply because they were bought by a bigger entity, and that bigger entity at the beginning said they were going to follow that, but in reality they didn't. And that's really the only example I can think of where we had to part with a farmer.
What did it change for great chefs working in the US to have top quality meat produced in the country?
So on their menu, it changed a lot the variety. For sure, 34 years ago when we started, most of the menus had, as far as the meat protein, chicken, beef, lamb, That's it. Then we added duck, then venison, then elk, then buffalo, then all those things, quail, rabbit, pheasant, all those things. So for them to shine, they had the opportunity to have an original ingredient that people were not familiar with in restaurants.
Talking about chefs, what is a great chef for you?
That's a very good question. I like this question. A very good chef for me has two things for him. One, a chef, to be a good chef, has to deep down take pleasure in giving pleasure to people. It's called the hospitality business for a reason. So that's the first thing that a chef should be, hospitable. The second thing is something that my father taught me when I was a kid, which is a good chef has to take things how they come in life, and so in particular in my world, animals, and make good with every part of that animal. So you don't have just a rack of lamb on your menu. You have to use also the shank and the leg and the shoulder of that animal, because that's how it came in life. It is not very practical today, because you have restaurants that are very high volume. You cannot have a butcher in a very small kitchen generally. More and more chefs can do that who have several restaurants, because then their bistro can take the leg of lamb, or the shoulder, and have a braised product there, while their flagship will have the chops and the prized middle meat that will cook faster.
You're providing foie gras. Is it in line with good practices with respect to animals for you?
Yes. So there is nothing inhumane about raising ducks or goose for foie gras. In Egypt, a very, very long time ago, the farmers realized that geese ready to migrate the wild ones, had a huge thing inside, the liver, and that was much, much better tasting when it was big than when it was small. And so when they were ready to migrate, they had this huge liver, and so they tried to reproduce that domestically in the farm. And basically they noticed that when they are ready to migrate, palmipeds, ducks and geese, are very, very hungry. They need to gorge themselves. They need to have calories to fatten their skin, because they're going to go and fly at high altitude to avoid predators. They are animals of prey, and they have no defense mechanism except flight. So they need that layer of skin, because they're going to go at high altitudes where it's colder, and they need that cockpit of calories, which is their liver, so that they can fly non-stop and don't have to go down for food in an unknown territory where predators abound. So migration as nature intended was like that. And so nature gave those palmipeds this natural propensity to expand the liver to get the calories. Also gave those palmipeds and other birds this esophagus, the esophagus being the neck, if you want, of birds, that is insensitive, that is lined with collagen, same material as your nail, in order to ingurgitate a huge amount of foods, to go to shelter, and then to be able to digest in the shelter slowly. Because unlike a predator, duck and geese cannot stay where they find the food, or they're going to be eaten by somebody else. That's the law of the jungle. So all those things make for foie gras.
Yeah, but that's a natural process. But I'm talking about the breeding process, which could appear very forceful for the animals.
So now, trying to reproduce this big liver domestically. One, you have to be very gentle, because if you're not, it dies on you. Two, you do use a system that makes them believe that it's migration time all the time. So in that term, yes, it's not natural. We're trying to get foie gras all year long. The fact that the esophagus is insensitive helps, because we're putting that funnel in there and that doesn't hurt. The fact that birds don't have gag reflex helps also, there is no gag reflex. They don't mind that. The fact that their liver has that natural propensity to grow helps it too. Once those animals are adult, ducks around 11 weeks old, which is, by the way, more than twice the age of a Long Island duck when it's processed. So that duck at 11 weeks old is brought inside in a pen with 4 or 5 other buddies where they can move around. They are in a pen, but of course they don't go outside anymore. We want them to have those calories. And then they are 3 times a day. Somebody comes with the food. The first day, those ducks are going to be pretty uncomfortable. And the main reason is that man is a predator. So it is not natural for man to be so close to a duck. So the first couple of days, the duck is uncomfortable. They don't have that big of an appetite. They have to really get used to that presence, that human presence. After 2 days, 2.5 days, then they realize man came 3 times a day in the last 2 days only to feed them. And that's why it's so important that it's always the same person who feeds the same ducks, because then there is this familiarity, and then the duck doesn't see man as the predator anymore, but as a feeder. On the 3rd day, you see it, it's very clear. The duck actually goes to the feeder instead of trying to avoid the feeder when the feeder comes to that particular pen to feed them. Then there is this, I hope to think, a tacit contract, which is that, hey, man gave duck the shelter, the no-stress life, plenty of food, plenty of drinks, no predators around during their life. But then, yes, at the end, we kill them.
What is the thing you wish someone told you before creating your business?
I think if there is one thing that I wish I knew before I started, was that we could have been faster, stronger, that if we had known this movement toward the food business in America was so strong, we could have started like kids start today, raising money and scaling up immediately. That wasn't the case. I mean, we were 2. We started with all our savings. It was $15,000. The banks didn't give us time of the day. The landlord neither. Nothing. And so because of that, we started slower. But then again, I don't know if it's a good thing or not, because there is something to be said for growing maybe a little slower but more steadily.
I'm gonna leave the room. Please hold the microphone and add whatever you want to the interview.
Seriously? Okay. So he's really leaving the room and closing the door. So I love the whole principle of this interview. It made me think about things I don't think of every day. And I'm really, really grateful for Philippe to have thought of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariane Daguin, for sharing your story. This is Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Music, Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.